Yeah, you will release an album, yeah, in a few days. So could you explain the lyrical concept of this no opus, dividing lines? It sounds very, yeah, interesting.
Well, I suppose we should first say that the title came from the song "Let It Burn." We sort of were looking for a title to sort of encapsulate what we were speaking about in the lyrics, and eventually we were looking through that track, which was written by Glyn, and just that dividing line sort of stuck out because of the sort of political commentary, which is the sort of theme of the album. It's a little bit almost as if it's related to the 2004 album Subsurface, if you
Hmm.
remember that one. It has similar sort of approach in terms of lyrics, and almost a connection between the two, a little bit
Hmm.
musically as well, um, which is good because that was always my favourite album. But the lyrics sort of speak of corruption, I suppose censorship, in this sort of post-truth sort of nightmare we've been in terms of the last of maybe 10 years of
Yeah.
politics, and not really preaching to anybody, just our sort of observations really, and you know, look at it from whichever angle you like really. But it was inspiring to sort of find those subjects, because initially when we'd finished touring, well, largely because of the pandemic, we finished touring for Legends of the Shires album. We were looking to possibly do a follow up to that, and I don't know. After a little while of thinking about it, it seemed a bit contrived, as if we were trying to set a template and force ourselves to write in a certain way. So we decided to go back to what we normally do, which is write freely without any constraints,
Hmm.
and see what emerges. And then, of course, we got this theme, and as soon as we realised what we were going to be writing about, it became quite easy to get the songs together. And so the last album being a very obvious sort of double concept album, this one is just back to what Threshold normally do, which is commonly linked tunes and lyrics throughout the album with a theme overall.
Hmm. So I have read that, yeah, yeah, Richard has formed a new band, Oblivion Protocol. They want to continue with the Shire saga. So were there any disputes about the decision, let's go on maybe with a second Shire's album or turn into a new concept?
Mm. Not really. I think maybe of the three of us, between myself, Glyn, and Richard, I think he was the one that was maybe keen on that subject. So Glyn sort of came back and said, "I'm not really sure." And when I started thinking about it, like I said, I thought we've never put ourselves in a position where we've got a framework and we have to fit into that. We want to be as creative as possible. And for Threshold, I always feel like we should try and separate each album because we've
Hmm.
done 12 albums now. I don't want to be covering the same ground as we've done before. And I think if you dip into songs you've written in the past, or if you look at
Hmm.
things you've done and then try and replicate those, I mean, I'm sure Richard will do a good job for him, but it's just not for us, really. I think Threshold is something about finding new ground each time,
Hmm.
exploring new
Hmm.
subjects. And it's already difficult enough to make an album sound different because as soon as the band play on it, they
Hmm.
have we have a stamp which sounds very much like Threshold. I've never been in a band that had that sort of strength of identity in the playing, but as soon as I do something which I think is maybe a little outside of the sound of Threshold, when the band play on it, then it
Hmm.
centralizes and we have that sound again. So for me, I really feel positive that we wanted to move on and do something new. And to be fair to Richard, he agreed with that. So there was no conflict over it. He just came back to me and said, do you mind if we use the Legends of the Shire's theme to make a new album?" So he's going to get a few other people to play on it, and he wanted to explore that. And I agreed to play a couple of solos for him on the album, so there was some sort of continuity there. And
Hmm.
yeah, we're more than happy for him to do that. It's not a problem.
Okay, of course. And your music is on the one hand intricate and sophisticated, but it's on the other hand accessible and catchy as well. So how do you realize this balance? Could you describe your writing and composing process?
Well, for me personally, my writing is always quite clear, and so much as write only in the time that's leading up to when you're recording an album, so you can, like I said, separate the albums so they're not repeating themselves, but more to capture the way that you feel and what's happening in your life at that time. And I think that has always worked for me. I mean, I try not to overcomplicate things, because when you start writing an album, it's probably the most difficult thing we do as musicians, is to write something that first of all convinces me and makes me excited when
Of
I listen
course.
back to the demo. But if you can't get excited yourself about the music, you can't expect anybody else to enjoy it. So that is really the hardest thing to do. I mean, is to get that initial spark for an album and make sure it's something really convincing, because it's not really worth making a new album until you get to that point, which is why
Hmm.
sometimes you'll see we've had 1 year between an album, sometimes 5 years. We never know how long, because I want that to be a natural process. I don't want it to feel as if we say we'll write an album in 2025 and then we expect to do it then. We just always leave
Mm,
it until we're ready to say something new. Uh, and I think that spark of creativity and that enthusiasm is something that always has to be there for me. It has to be. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it.
mhm.
I can't honestly go out and start touring and playing live and try and convince people there's any point to come and see us unless we've got something really good to offer. And
Of
that's
course.
always been the process.
Hmm. And you're an outstanding guitar player. So how important is soloing, guitar soloing for you for the threshold albums? Because some guitar players, they try to bring in the solos, they stand in the foreground, but in your case, they are good. It's a good, yeah, complex sound, and they are well integrated in your music. So how important is soloing for you?
I wouldn't necessarily think of it as soloing, really, because when I think of that, I think of the bands that I grew up with in the '80s, the metal bands, where it was a case of joining together some scales, really.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
of it in a quite different way, really. I like to think of it as an extension of the rest of the song, really, almost the vocal. So rather than thinking of it distinctly as something different, it should be part of the song and integrated as one of the main melody lines. So in that way, I don't really write solos with the guitar.
Hmm.
I would normally take the demo that we've got and go out into the park with my phone, listen to it on earphones, and then maybe I've got a little dictaphone separately from the phone which I sing into, and I get my melody ideas from that, and that gives me a
Hmm.
structure for a solo. And in that way, I know that I'm not going to constantly play the same shapes and patterns, because your
Hmm.
muscle memory will automatically make your fingers fall into certain positions when you know which chords you're playing.
Yeah,
And then of course you think, oh, I know what comes next, so I'll play this, and that
yeah.
then you repeat yourself. So I try to do it by singing, or maybe sometimes I use the piano, something different from guitar to get the initial idea.
Ah, yes. Hmm.
And then when I have that, I'll learn that on the guitar, and then maybe add extra parts and maybe some technique in as well. But it just gives me fresh approach on the way I involve the instrumental sections.
Okay, yes. And yeah, all tracks are great. But at the moment, yeah, Hall of Echoes is my favorite track because it's an earworm. So what stands behind the song musically and lyrically?
um, I think a lot of those subjects that run through the album are the
Yeah.
sort of those sort of political themes, really, and sort of themes like gaslighting, where people try to undermine your confidence in and what you know to be true, maybe overload you with information to try and confuse people. Those sort of techniques that were used to sort of gain power and then divide people, between two different forms of opinion. And
Hmm.
I felt like in the last 10 years or so, our country certainly has never been so divided. And I really hope we're coming to a point where we start leaving that way of thinking and reunite the country, because we're falling behind in terms of all sorts of things, really, just because there's no unity in the country. People
Hmm.
constantly trying to blame other countries and foreigners for the problems we've created ourselves. And I think unless we see that, we can't fix that. And I really hope we're turning a corner on that, and we'll get a new, friendlier politics, and really all of that leads to interaction between people in the country. Rather than being divided and angry at each other. It used to be so different not so long ago, and I just hope we can return to that, and it'll be good for everybody, really. I mean, there's so
Okay.
much damage was done in the last 6 or 7 years, and that needs to be fixed. And those
Okay, yeah,
themes, in
understand.
different forms, those themes run through a lot of the songs on the album. So.
Hmm.
And in fact, that was the first track written for the album. In fact, it started things in many ways for me, anyway.
Yeah. And there are two long songs on the album, The Domino Effect and Defense Condition. So did you
Mm.
have to choose a different kind of songwriting for these epics compared to the shorter ones? How would you
I
see it?
suppose, yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I think it's more of a case that it gives you more freedom,
Ah,
because when you're constrained to a smaller length, a shorter length, there's less you can do. And I think when you get to a point in writing a song, you think, oh, this isn't going to be like a 5 or 6 minute song. I haven't finished. It's going to be longer. You suddenly realise, and you can compose almost like a through composition. So you don't quite know where you're going, but you're moving forward.
mhm,
Whereas sometimes when you write a song, you've kind of got the parts together and you're going to structure it. But this one, you start writing and then you think, oh, I can just move on to what feels natural to come
mhm,
next, and then next, and then when you feel you're coming to the conclusion, you find an ending or maybe a coda or something to structure it. But I like writing those songs because you do have that freedom that
mhm,
you really don't quite know where you're going to end up, and it's quite exciting to sort of find that format where it's open. And I think when we started our band, we only become what's called progressive metal now because we'd had some people in the band that loved metal music, bands like Testament, that sort of thing. And then there was John Geary, who was in our band at the time, the bass player and the lyricist, was particularly into Rush and Genesis and these
mhm,
Pink Floyd and all these sorts of bands. And he introduced that progressive element to our music. Because we were friends at the time, we weren't considered a serious band. We just thought, well, let's blend the music and all our favourite things. And he sort of taught us to love that kind of music. And I really learned that sort of freedom of expression, particularly from listening to sort of middle period Genesis.
mhm,
It's sort of I don't know, Trick of the Tail and albums like that, where the structure of the songs was kind of not necessarily what you'd expect from when the sort of music I'd listened to growing up. And I think that really gave me the freedom to do what I wanted to and learn to appreciate that music.
mhm. But it's you don't if you have these epics, you don't say I want to write a long song. It's more the idea, and then you get
Mm.
new ideas, and then it is a long
Yeah,
song. But you don't
it's
and
very much like when we were writing. If you think of it in a bigger area, like when we were writing Legends of the Shires, we reached 1 hour and we thought we kind of got enough for an album. But both myself and Richard, we both said we've got more ideas. Let's just see if we can keep going and see what would happen. And so that just evolved on its own and became a double album. And this is on a smaller scale. That's how one of these songs develops. You're
yeah,
writing and you just realise that you haven't got to the end, and the song's taking charge of you instead of the other way around. So
mhm.
it's quite an interesting way to work.
Yeah, richtig, right. Yeah, you and Richard, you are the main songwriters in Threshold. So how far, goes the influence of the other three musicians, Johan, Glenn, and Steve, in co-writing and arranging? Is Glenn now responsible for the lyrics now, or how is it today?
So, some of them. I mean, in fact, so Glyn became more of a major writer on this album because he had 3 songs on the album. He wrote the music and lyrics for. So he wrote on his own, and we were, really happy with what he did, and it worked out very well for this album. So it gave us a little bit more variation because obviously most of the time it has been 2 of us writing. But to be fair, the others have always been involved, and I find myself even now because I know how well you know, how well Johan plays, exactly what he's likely to play. I find myself making demos and programming the drums, and then we listen afterwards and we say, oh, that's actually Johan's beat. That's the way he would play. And you know, we're so used to the way each other work that I'm using what he would normally play in rehearsal, or maybe he would adapt a song. You know, and I know what he would do, and so his influence is always there when I'm writing.
Oh yeah.
And Steve has written before. He wrote a song on the last album, so he's involved as well. So I think the whole band is responsible for the sound of Threshold, even if they're not writing. So it feels very much. It doesn't feel like a duo at all. It feels like a whole band, and everybody is contributing in one way or another.
Okay, that's good. And yeah, you have had 3 singers in the lineups of your long career. So firstly, did you have to vary your kind of composing due to the different kinds of voices? And secondly, how would you see your musical progress, yeah, from Wounded Land to Dividing Lines?
That's kind of a big question, isn't it? we sometimes get to hear those earlier albums, particularly when we had to re-release them, and I hadn't listened for many years, so it's a shock when you go back to those earlier albums. You think, in my head, because we play some of those live and I know them, I don't feel like the sound has changed. But when you go back and hear them, you think, my goodness, yeah, there was quite a difference. And to be honest, I don't think I could even write in the same way now. As you learn to write and arrange music and you become better at that, you change the way you approach things. Maybe there's something in the fact that you don't really know what you're doing on the first few albums. You don't really fully understand how things are working. You just sort of take chances and you write maybe things that are quite odd at times, and you couldn't possibly imagine how you came across those when you go back to hear them. So yeah, definitely things have changed. I forget what the other part of the question was.
Yeah, and yeah, really, the singers, the
Oh, the
various
singers,
things, do
yeah.
you have to choose a different kind of songwriting because of the various voices, different voices?
I personally, I don't, because I try not to limit what I'm doing by thinking about their voices. I know that Damien had the highest range, you know, a little bit higher than anyone else could sing, and Glyn can maybe go lower than the other two, but they can all pretty much reach the same. There's only 1 or 2 songs which don't overlap. So we try to. I certainly try to write music without thinking exactly who's going to sing it, because I think, again, you're limiting yourselves. As I discussed
Yeah.
with guitar solos, you don't really want to try and confine what you're doing. And if you need to adjust a few notes when you finish writing, yeah, fair enough. But why limit yourself? And I think we learned early on that, you know, I think Damien left just after we'd finished recording the first album, and then he left just before we were going to record Clone as well. So, you know, those things happen. You're not always in control of what other people are doing. You know, if they have some great opportunity, they want to do something different. We often lost singers. So
Yeah.
and then they came back and they left and they came back, and I mean, all 3 singers were fantastic. So we were always very lucky. And when it came to the point where Damien had gone again this time, you know, a few years ago, Richard and I both said, no, we don't want to start again. So let's just see if Glyn is available. And
Yeah.
luckily, he'd been waiting for an opportunity to come back to the band. So I mean, we would always try and, you know, stick with the people we know now, because they feel as if they're part of Threshold, even if we have changed singers. The familiarity there, and I know that they're all really good, and I don't have to confine myself when I'm writing music at the moment. And that goes so far as we do our demos without the singers. We do it with somebody else. So we're not even thinking about that until we've finished the songs. And then if we need to adapt something, as I said, we will do.
Okay, and yeah, so you have mentioned the singers came and went and came back. So did you find the ultimate Threshold line up now? And how would you see it? Is it now a stable and permanent lineup?
I tend to think of it as like a football team, really.
Yeah.
As if you've got 5 members and, you know, 12 substitutes, because my wife looked online the other night and said, "You've had 17 band members." I thought, wow. So I don't really think of it like, as long as we keep. I think Threshold is an entity in itself without the members in many ways, and it feels as if that rolls on regardless of who has come and gone. But I don't really want new members. I don't want to change things at all because I feel great at the moment the way things have been. But I feel like everyone is still involved somehow. The people that have left as well. I'm still in contact with most of them.
Mm-hmm.
I particularly, I always meeting up with John Geary, who left the band in 2002, and yet we're still in contact and great friends. So, and a lot of the other people as well. Even Damien, after the last time he left, we're in contact again now. So, I feel as if it's one big sort of group of people, and
I
these are the 5 people
understand.
that are in the band at the moment.
So there are no mixed emotion. It's still a good, connection, even if they
Well, I
left.
mean, it's difficult being in a band, and there will always be some level of conflict if you care about what you're doing, because there are situations where you'll start together for a long period of time, and if you have different opinions, it's always going to be difficult because you're in a confined space on a tour bus or working in the studio or something, and
Mm-hmm.
every band has its problems like that. And my friends, they've got bands that have had the same turnover. I mean, there's only one friend I've got, with a band called Pendragon that have got a
Mm-hmm.
fairly solid lineup. But I mean, I don't. Everybody else I know, all the other bands, there's always been a churn, and it's not always because you fall out with people. Sometimes it's because they have a family, young family or something, and they decide they can't commit the time to going away for so long, or they have a
Mm-hmm.
job, or else they're working on different bands. Millions of reasons that come up, and they have to come and go, and you can't get into a situation where you never speak to somebody again because you've had some sort of disagreement. Unfortunately, that there isn't a situation like that. Everybody who's been in Threshold, we're on good relationships with again. So that's a great way to be, really.
Mm-hmm. And live, it's a different situation, I guess. Glenn plays a little bit rhythm guitar, but
Mm.
before, if you had a second guitar player,
Mm.
Nick Mitzen and Pete
Mm.
Morton. So, do you miss a second guitar player live? Is it some kind of yeah obstacle,
Um,
or how would you see it?
well, I think we decided when Glyn came back, I knew he was a really great guitar player. I knew he could do everything. It was more a case of we were thinking, let's try it out and see what happens, because I was convinced that we didn't need guitar on every track for 2 guitars. It was as if we were
Hmm.
doubling up some parts. So I just sort of found the songs where I needed things, and I made a video for each song showing Glyn what to play to learn it. And then I said, would you be able to play and sing at the same time with these parts? And can you play the solos or the harmony solos on these parts? And it worked out. So it would have been, if it didn't work out, we would have maybe got another guitar player. I don't know, but we just wanted to try it out. And I think because he'd had a band of his own quite a few years ago called Mind Feed, and
Hmm.
he'd been the only guitar player and singer at the same time. So he'd gotten used to playing and singing. And we've never had a problem since he's been back. So it's
Hmm.
perfect. I mean, it's
Good.
always easier to have one fewer band members as well, just for traveling and all the things that happen when you're on tour. So it worked out really well. So if Pete was going to leave, which he did, we didn't feel like we wanted to replace him if we didn't have to.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that was the way, and everything's perfect now. I think I could probably get Glyn to play pretty much every song if I wanted to, but we don't really need it anymore, and it doesn't feel like that. So we're getting him to play where it's needed, and then he puts the guitar down, and then he
Hmm.
picks it up when he
Hmm.
needs to, and it's kind of a feature of the show. It's quite interesting, he picks it up and puts it down, and
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes he'll be the lead singer, sometimes he'll be singer and guitarist. So I think it's enjoyable for him because we have some longer instrumental passages, like The Man Who Saw Through Time or something, and I see bands where singers leave the stage for five
Yeah,
minutes,
yeah. Play
and
tambourine.
he's always involved, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, the artwork of Dividing Lines and previous albums is very sophisticated.
Mm.
So are you involved in the design of your albums? How do they come up?
Well, we don't really go about it that way any. We've changed the way we work with that. So we used to get an artist to take our lyrics and we give them some idea what it's about and ask for them to come up with some artwork. And sometimes that would work. And other times you'd end up annoying the artist because maybe the wrong idea. And then we say, can you change this and do that and change it? And, record labels don't seem to have endless budgets.
Yeah,
So, so we started thinking when we did Legends of the Shires, we thought, well, what about looking around? There are so many artists with great portfolios online now, and we thought, well, let's look and try and find the artwork to match the album instead of going the other way around. And we found this perfect piece of artwork for Legends of the Shires, and it worked really well.
yeah.
And in fact, the only award the album won was for the artwork. So it was a good way of working. And I think we just decided to do that again. So on this album, I found a particular artist I liked, and I sent the artwork to Richard, and he said, "Oh, that's really good." But I looked on the next page and on the same artist, and I found this, and I really love this one, and it sort of worked for the theme of the album, but it was more to do with the fact that I think he found this common link to some of our previous album covers, which really felt like it was a Threshold album cover. It has a certain connection with Hypothetical, which was the floating city in the sky. I think it was, just stolen from Texas, I think, somewhere. But it's just that sort of theme, the way it was floating in the sky, had the same feel, and a little bit, I suppose, linked to Wounded Land. The orb in the sky, the circle. There was some sort of general feeling that it felt like Threshold, and it worked. So that's the way we find our artwork now, rather than finding the artist. We find the artwork and then approach the artist afterwards.
Oh yeah, good. It's a good thing. And do you have any tour plans right now?
Agent is in Germany, is now working on our tour because we got offered quite a few sort of festival dates, and it just opened up the possibility about thinking about touring again, which we haven't played outside of the UK for about nearly 3 years now. So it's because of the obvious reasons. But we lost many tour dates that we were doing, and we thought it was quite disappointing to cancel those, and there were problems for the promoters. So we thought until we're ready to be sure, we won't book any more dates. But when these opportunities came up, we just decided that we wanted to go out on tour again, and it's a lot more difficult now, of course. Because of the fuel costs thing, it's twice as expensive for tour buses, and then of course our country decided to leave the EU, and that's a real problem for musicians. That's really
Of course.
difficult. Many reasons, just boring things like VAT and visas and carnets, which is when you list all your equipment to carry, and you have to produce a document, and costs, and there's
Yeah,
so
of
much
course.
work,
Yeah, it's
so many unpleasant things that you don't want to do, but the overriding feeling in the band is that we exist to go out and play our music live, and if we don't do that, we don't see the point in writing new music. So we wanted to go and play live again. And I just said to the whole band, you realise, there's more risk now, but do you want to go? And everybody in the band just said immediately they wanted to tour again. So we contacted Loudy, and he's working on it now. So we will probably have tour dates from sometime from April onwards, maybe into May. And then we have festival dates in various countries at the moment, which I think a few have been confirmed, other ones he's working on at the moment as well. So there will be more and more announcements in the next few months, I guess.
yeah, hope you the best. And your first album, Wounded Land, yeah, was released in September of 1993. So do you plan a 30 years anniversary tour as well, maybe after the Dividing Lines tour? Maybe
Um,
with, yeah.
I think our record label are kind of keen to sort of celebrate it somehow. We're thinking of a few ideas at the moment. We're speaking with them. So we'll probably announce something at some stage, but we are working on something to sort of celebrate 30 years of that. It does seem, it's
Maybe with
amazing how those anniversaries come around.
all three singers maybe on stage wouldn't be a good idea, or
That would be a bit tricky with Mac. I mean, unfortunately.
oh yeah, okay. Oh yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah,
maybe in
okay.
video, but it's very sad. But I mean, I would love him to still be around.
Yeah, of
But
course. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
he was a really big part of what Threshold did, and where the band came from being a relatively sort of semi-professional band up to being we expanded a lot in the years that we had with Mac and found our sound, and it was a big
Mm,
deal. So he's always well remembered, and very sad that he's been going so long. I think what, 10 or 11 years, 11 years, I think now. So
yeah.
um, yeah, it would be fantastic, of course, but
Sorry, I
we
knew,
will
but
arrange something though. I think in this next year we will arrange something to
maybe,
celebrate.
of course, with I had another band, a different band in my mind. The
Yes, yeah.
Michael Schenker group. They had the Michael Schenker Fest with former
Mm.
singers. All former singers performed
Oh
live.
wow. Yeah.
So, for example, but I know it's in your case, I was at a blank. But
Mm.
this would be a good idea, yeah, maybe to celebrate 30 years of Threshold.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
It's another
yeah.
30 years, yeah.
So, and yeah, you've got your own studio, the Thin Ice Studio. And which other bands do you want to produce in the near future? Is it just Threshold at the moment, or do you working with other bands as well?
I do. I mean, I do a lot of productions. I finished a new Edenbridge album this year. What else? I did a band called Duralium, which is sort of more extreme metal. Um, I'm doing a Pendragon album at the moment, maybe an EP, I think. We're talking about some more work with Yes. What else am I doing? I'm doing a new Galahad album at the moment, which I finished one, and we're doing a
Hmm.
second album mixing at the moment. Yeah, there were plenty of things that I'm doing. The only thing is that I work less and less with musicians. So this sort of pandemic came along, and everybody started working locally, and they were just sending everything to me to mix.
Hmm.
And we work remotely over the internet, so they can hear what I'm doing, but that we're speaking, via Skype or something. And unfortunately, that became a way of working. I'm not sure that's really going to come back. I may work with drummers, but generally people record other instruments on their own now and then send them to me, which sometimes is okay and sometimes makes it a bit more difficult.
Hmm.
But it's more of a shame of losing that physical contact with musicians, which is what I always was involved in music for at the beginning, that
Hmm.
contact with other people. And it's a bit of a shame we've sort of lost that. I think that will be a new way of working going forward, really. I mean, so it's become a lonely life. It's become like working
Yeah,
in an office on your own. Yeah.
yeah,
Like every other job, just a computer and a desk.
we see it. Yeah, it has got its pros and cons. It's yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's great
other.
because I can do nearly all my work from home now. I have a mixing room at home which actually sounds better than the studio, because it's just designed for mixing and the acoustics are just right. So that's not a problem. But it's the fact that I come upstairs and sit on my own all day. So and that's not what I got involved in music for. I left, when I first left college, I worked for the government for a few years, and I didn't mind it. I was working in arts and recreation, so it was interesting. But really, I felt quite isolated doing lots of paperwork and that sort of thing. And
Mhm,
when I first started working in the studio, it was all about this contact with other musicians and gathering together and
mhm,
having great ideas and those moments which make great albums. And gradually, that the way of working has just changed. And it's good and bad. It means I can
mhm.
I can do things. I can be in contact a lot more with my children and family, but at the same time, I'm losing contact with people in the studio a little bit. That's all.
Mhm. Of course. So these were my questions. Yeah, the time is running out. Yeah,
Hmm.
Karl, thank you very much for this nice interview. All the best that this album will, yeah, come up. I will do my best to promote it.
Thank you.
It's a great album. Fantastic. I heard it several times. Fantastic. I hope all the best, and maybe we see you
Mm.
on tour, yeah, next year.
Yeah.
Hopefully, and
Well,
yeah.
I hope it really connects with people. That's sort of the reason that motivates you into writing music is to connect with other people, and maybe they have some shared experiences, and that will maybe touch them and make them feel good in terms of listening to the music. So that would be great, and it was really great to speak to you again, and hope we meet up sometime a date on tour.
Yeah, well, I hope as well. See you backstage. Yeah, thank you very much, Karl. Good success and all the best. Greetings to the rest of the band. Yeah,
Yeah, will do.
thank you
Have
very
a good
much.
evening.
Bye bye. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.